Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 23 of season 2 of Gunners and Blues. My name is Sean Morgan. I am joined by Andrew Gump, and it is Midweek Madness time. This is, if you are subscribed to us, and this is your first Midweek Madness, well, let's do a little introduction, because if you're subscribing to us on YouTube, this is your first Midweek Madness. So what we do is every Wednesday we have an off-topic podcast that is centered around really a topic that we alternate picking from between myself and Andrew. This week, we are talking about culture shock. So we've had quite an eclectic group of topics, I think, so far with this. We started off very heavy.
A little too heavy, maybe.
Yeah, with the first Midweek Madness. We kind of lightened it up a bit, but every once in a while we kind of veered, I think, into definitely some more personal moments, some more personal, I think, I don't know, like things that are really close to us, like really close to the heart. So a lot of good content, I think, available here, and especially with this topic, because culture shock, I think, happens to really everybody unless you live in, I think, like an isolated part of the world and you never leave like a 5-mile radius from where you were born. And there are plenty of people that, and you know what, they live productive lives. But for the rest of us that, travel or have moved to different places, there's always that adjustment period. And I think that unexpected adjustment is really, and that's why the term culture shock is there. So, Andrew, this is your topic. So, without further ado, kick us off. Give me an example. Give me what is it about this that made you want to make it a Midweek Madness thing?
Well, first and foremost, I was trying to think about humorous things that have happened in my past, rather than thinking about the darker things, which I think if anyone has known me or listened to our podcast, I tend to get a little dark with things if I'm just left to my own devices.
Sometimes. I got
Just a little
really, I got really in a few times, but other than that,
Yeah. But no, and for me, culture shock, especially in retrospect, is always something I kind of laugh. It gives me a really big laugh because I like things that surprise me. I like music that surprises me, so on and so forth. This was probably, it's funny in retrospect, like I said, but was really probably the biggest shock I've ever experienced up to, when I moved from, I was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, lived in Florida, but was homeschooled. And I went to a elementary school called St. Joseph's Academy, which kind of gives you an idea of what type of school it was like. And then I moved to a little place called McMinnville, Tennessee. And I remember my first class, it was English. And they were doing something, and Sean is actually aware of this, as he was also a part of the Tennessee schooling system. My first class, I came in, and they were singing a song about what an adverb was. And I can't explain to you how baffled, right? To me, this is no hate on like Schoolhouse Rocks, but that was kind of like what you did in like first and second grade. And this was like a really bad Southern version of Schoolhouse Rocks. And I went in there, I was just, this isn't like, I'm not trying to like sound superior, but if you just at the schooling system I had come from, I was working on what is, you're kind of taught in America, the 5-point the 5-point essays. You have your opening, 3 points of closing. And we were literally learning the parts of speech. And I was, I was like, oh my God. And it really got worse from there. They had a read. Well, actually, first of all, let me ask you about the Shirley method, bro, because you actually remember the preposition song, right, bro? You remember the preposition song.
So I think, and you may have actually probably made a few enemies, because to me that song and that whole like that jingle. That it was a learning tool for a lot of people, and they remember. I am definitely not going to go through and sing any of it on this particular
Come
episode.
on,
No, 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 no.
preposition, preposition.
That's you gotta maybe if that's the song that you want me to do if for the Lukaku bet, then I will do it. If it's the other on the other shoes on the other foot, then that's what you're gonna have to do. But no, it never really bothered me that much. And to be fair, like the only reason it stood out to me is because it was such a strange kind of surreal part of learning looking back. And I mean, I moved around a crap ton.
Yeah, we both did.
Yeah, like the up until my senior year of high school, I had only ever been at the same school for an entire like calendar school year once, which was in 6th grade. And so I got to see how various schools all across the country, mostly concentrated on the East Coast and in what is considered the Bible Belt, how they operated. And so, well, by golly gee whiz, that Shirley method, that saw a lot of use. But
I didn't actually have a problem with learning through songs so much as I was in. Like I said, I was working on essays, and then we were learning about the parts of speech. It just was there was a huge like disconnect going from because, like I said, elementary school I went to an academy, and then I had been homeschooled by two relatively intelligent, well, not very intelligent people. It just was such a shock to me.
Correct yourself for a second.
Well, they might watch this. No, but no, but it, like I said, it got even stranger. So they had like this, I think it was AR.
Mm-hmm. The accelerated reading?
Yeah, the accelerated reading thing. And you get points. You take tests on books that you read. And
those were the days, man.
Oh, man. And I with school for me, at a certain point in time, if I didn't think I was going to, I would just read during all the classes. I didn't care if my teachers came at me or whatnot. What are you going to do then? I don't care. So I would read, and then I'd take these tests. And I remember I had so many points because they would give you points each time you took a test. And I had so many points in the first semester. First of all, some girl ended up hating me. Absolutely, because she apparently had always in that school been number one, and she wasn't this time. And she spent the 2 years that I was there just trying to make my life a living hell for some unknown reason. Well, no, I do know why, but it was weird. And nonetheless, but they called my parents in and said I was cheating. That no child could read that many books. And I was like, first of all, why? What am I gaining from these AR points? Except I've raised the ire of this girl that's making my life ever living hell. Like, what? But they actually called my parents in. And this was also, they called my parents in, and I used the word, and I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" And they also gave me after-school detention for that. When they said, "We're going to talk to your parents," I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" And apparently that was a no-no as well, because they gave me detention for it, and I heard that in my other schools. You didn't use it all the time, but I was very confused. It was, going from a maybe more liberal, I don't even know if you say liberal, but open-minded place to a very rural, still agrarian-based, very Christian school and system. And it blew my mind, man. Like, I didn't hate it. I made friends there. I became actually quite popular after a while, but it was insane. I just didn't know, like, the initial year, I had no idea what to do with myself. There was nothing to do. There was nowhere to go. We only had you could only get dial-up internet. So I wasn't rock.
It's high quality internet.
Yeah.
Those were the days.
the internet. Um, and if you wanted to go anywhere, it was 10 miles, like 5 or 10 miles to get to anything. And people would legitimately meet up at Walmart to hang out, or anytime you got in a fight, because I got into a lot of fights going into that, because like I said, I have very little flight reflex. And you know where you went to fight? They would say, and I'm going to use their parlance, we're meeting at the theaters. The theaters, not the theaters, the theaters. I was from Tennessee. Did you remember the
Gotta
theaters?
have, yeah, sometimes there's some extra syllables or changes in syllables. You're just like, okay.
Yeah.
So I want to comment a little bit on the AR reading thing. So
Yeah.
that was also something I experienced.
Yeah.
And I remember it may have been fifth grade, where I went through and realized that I had so many more points than anybody else. I needed to make sure I tried to double the number of points that the next closest person had. So I would go through and I would choose books that I had no fucking business reading in fifth grade. And I would go through and I would read them, and they would be worth like 100 something points, or like just something crazy, just so I could go through and put as much distance. And what was my grand prize? Going out and eating pizza with the principal that I hated, because he took my Pokemon cards from me, because this was during fifth grade.
Yeah.
That he took from me because I was buying, selling, and trading them during, like basically during recess and then before and after school. And somebody stole one of them, and I got really upset. And it eventually got to the principal, and so basically he just went through and took all that I had that day and said that I would be able to get them back at the end of the year. And so my grand prize for doing all of that hard work and effort, was having to look at that stupid motherfucker while I ate pizza at, and if any of our listeners are in Oklahoma, Mazzio's Pizza, that was where we went in good old McLeod, Oklahoma. That was my trophy, right? That's I felt like a very hollow victory. It was like the Audi Cup of childhood accomplishments.
I mean, I actually didn't get one because my behavior was not up to the standards, so I did not get a reward, is what they said. And they gave it to the girl that was making my life a living hell anyway.
Oh,
So she got exactly what she wanted. Like I said, it was the weirdest thing. I didn't know what to do with myself. You have no idea the level. I had the level difference, like in maths and science, and I'm really not trying to shit talk you, because they were good, kind of. Some of them were pretty good people, but there was just a very big difference to what I had been learning up to that point and what I was there. And it just, so like I said, I just basically spent my time messing around, and they would say, "Well, you reading that?" And I would take the most irritating books I could possibly find, like any book that was really not. I used to love just carrying around a Clockwork Orange and not actually reading it, because I'd finished it already. But I would just say, "I'm reading a Clockwork Orange," and they're like, "What? That's not good."
If there's anything Tennessee loved, it's being critical of what sort of whether it was educational or not, any sort of media that you would digest that wasn't on their list of approved things. So I want to talk about this. Actually, no, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, I'll chat about it. So sit tight. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back. So one of the culture shock, just to not change the subject too much, but I do want to talk about some weird transitions that I had to go through, and I think are definitely related to childhood. So I moved to South Carolina in 7th grade. Now, I just mentioned a little bit before that 6th grade was one of the only years that I had remained at the same school for the entire calendar year. This was the same school that I was at in 5th grade for about 5-ish months. So basically, I think just before Christmas or at Christmas break was when I had moved. And so I had a good year and a half of having the same friends, having the same school, the same everything, and I was really starting to hit my stride. And we move right in the middle of, those those very formative years, right? Because going into basically middle school or junior high is, I think, it's a challenging time for any kid. But I hated going to a new school in the middle of that, and it was probably the worst year of my life, bullied like no other. And South Carolina, I specifically moved to Charleston, and I will never live in Charleston again. Outside of the bad experience, the weather is terrible. I hated the people. I hated everything about it. I am not a fan of South Carolina, to say the least. But this was the first time I had really been to, I think, a school that was predominantly non-white. And I lived I had a rather privileged upbringing, where even though we didn't have a tremendous amount of money, at certain points, we never really lived in areas that were considered, I think, like below the poverty line. We never lived anywhere that I would consider to be a, quote unquote, poor area. Regardless of demographic, we never lived. And so we moved to South Carolina. We actually lived in a rather nice upscale neighborhood. And I had my own room for the first time in a long time. And because at the time, one of my brothers that I had been sharing a room with didn't come with us. He ended up, I forgot what the situation was, but he wasn't with us. And I was excited for that part, at least. But I had never gone to a school that was predominantly African American, and I simply did not know how to fit in. I didn't. There was a huge cultural and racial barrier that me individually, I didn't know how to deal with. And unfortunately, my family is very conservative, very, entrenched in who they are and what they are. And some of that had bled out on me. And so I had a lot of preconceptions and notions that I had to work with and deal with. And I think it was really the first time that I, managed to have some strong individual growth that year. It sucked because I got bullied because of my backpack. I will admit that as an adult, I look back on that and it was probably some of my own fault. I had a rolly backpack. I was the rolly backpack kid. I was the rolly backpack kid. Now let me defend myself. Let me defend myself. You were not allowed to go, because the way that the lockers were, to prevent people from breaking into them, they had removed all of the lockers. So instead, you had storage areas in your homeroom. And you had there were 3 different times during the day that you could visit your homeroom. The beginning of the day to grab the books that you needed, before lunch, before/after lunch, and then at the end of the day. So for me, the way that my lunchtime fell and where my homeroom was, it made more sense for me to have all of my books with me throughout the day, so I didn't have to constantly go back, and drop everything off. And so I simply kept everything with me. So I had a larger backpack. It was like a travel backpack. Basically, it was one that you would take on plane trips and stuff. And, it had the bars in the back. It was a high quality backpack. I think it was a gift. It was like a $180 backpack. I loved it. But I got relentlessly bullied for it because it was big, it was bulky, and it rolled. And the other thing that I made, and this was a huge mistake on my part as well. So there was a dress code because of there were a lot of gang activity in the area, and so to curb it, that's what the administration decided. You have a dress code. And every Friday, you could wear something that wasn't in the dress code. In seventh grade, sixth grade as well, I don't know why, I refused to wear pants or shorts, and unless it was really hot. So in the wintertime, when it was, our Friday, I only wore windbreakers. And so that did not help me
Yeah.
in the slightest. But it never really been a thing. Right? It never really
Yeah.
been something
Yeah.
that I had,
It's difficult, man.
that I'd realized was a social faux pas. And, that's where I learned. But I managed to make some friends in spite of that. And the year turned out, okay toward the end. But I still do not look at that. And then whenever I, left, and then in eighth grade, I was in Florida, I was in Panama City, I had learned my lesson. And I did not wear windbreakers. I did not have the gigantic backpack anymore. And I made a lot more friends. It's also when I got back into sports after having basically, like in South Carolina, taken a nice little hiatus. And that also helped things out. So I think sometimes in moving to a new place or having something where it's so drastically different,
Sure.
you really have to learn to adapt. And then in 10th grade and 11th part of it, I went back to a school that was, predominantly not white, and it was much easier for me. It was much easier because I understood where I was culturally, where I was socially, and how to better interact with people who didn't have the same upbringing that I did, who didn't have the same sort of interests that I did, and didn't have the same sort of cultural values that I did. And I think that's probably how I am now shaped politically a lot by that transition. And so I think, the difference in culture sometimes from your upbringing to what you get thrown into as a formative adult, like as in those formative years, really does a hell of a lot to shape how you end up as an adult. Do you have anything that's like similar or anything that may have impacted you in a similar
Well,
manner?
speaking on your last point, I think it's something that obviously galled me to no end when I was younger. Just the idea, because I moved around pretty much as often as you did, and I do think it actually does make for, in some ways, it's very difficult when you're going through it, just switching friends and so on and so forth. But I do think it actually helps, I think, form a more open mind, right? Because I think we both come from pretty conservative backgrounds. I think maybe mine wasn't quite as conservative, but I think we both end up being quite a bit more liberal
Mm-hmm.
than maybe a lot of people that if we had just, grown up in the single town, and this is not throwing shade to anyone that stays in one small town or people that are conservative. That's not what I'm not going to tell people how to live their lives, but I'm very, as an adult, after going through the experience, I feel almost fortunate that I had the ability to experience these things so that I could. There's a word. It's called sonder. Just know it, which means that you are aware that every person that you meet's life is just as complex as yours. And it seems, when you say it, it seems like, okay, everyone knows that. But to actually think about it, actively think about it as you go throughout your day, I think a lot of that was me experiencing culture shock so many times, moving from here to there, being obscenely poor when I was younger, very incredibly poor, to being very, very wealthy at certain points in time. It really gives you this idea that I think, even if you just like grow up middle class, stay middle class, never leave middle class, I think you miss out a lot. This sounds weird, but those weeks were like, oh shit, will we have enough money for food? Like, but there's all those other weeks where like, wow, I could literally buy whatever I want, and you don't go overboard. But I learned those things by just the vicissitudes of life, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that, you experience so many cultures from so many different ways. Just the culture shock of being immensely, like I said, when I was first born, very, very poor, like incredibly, incredibly poor. in an area where shootings were pretty common, and then I was incredibly wealthy for a short period of time, especially when I was playing poker. You really experience a lot, and there's a culture that goes with wealth, right? That may be actually the most defining cultural characteristic that people don't like talking about. I think in America is the culture of wealth. People, have started to talk about like pay gaps and things, but how differently you look at life going from being obscenely impoverished to almost obscenely wealthy, like quite wealthy, I would say. It's not the same as, being comfortable your whole life or, being poor your whole life or being rich your whole life. You really experience a lot. And I think more people should. I'm very glad that maybe the dialogue is opening up a little bit more in the United States about the culture shock of, you know, wealth
Hmm.
for the most part. I've often wondered about asking you. I wanted to ask you about this. I guess it's the best time to do it. Like, how have you experienced that? I don't know, obviously your financial background your whole life, but have you kind of experienced like being in very poor parts of a city to wealthy parts and so on and so forth? Did you notice like a very distinct cultural difference?
There's definitely a huge, I think, what really stood out to me the most as far as like the biggest difference goes are like the all the little things that add up, all of
Mm,
the assumptions that when I was basically I was a poor kid, and
mm,
then I became a I would say middle class, like lower middle class kid, and then
mm,
I became a poor adult, and now I am not a poor adult. Now I make enough money to live comfortably, to have various investments, to like the whole maxed out 401k, having a stock portfolio, having a crypto portfolio, having money in savings, basically having the discretionary income to buy whatever the hell I want. If you're watching this on YouTube versus listening, you can see in the background there's a series of expensive Lego sets. So it's like probably $1,500, like right there, and then behind me there's the Millennium Falcon. There's a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox. Like I can spend money on things, right?
mm,
It boggles my mind to try to think back about when I was a young teenager and my parents simply wouldn't choose to buy these types of things. And knowing the types of things that they chose to buy instead, the way that they spent their discretionary income was so different than the way richer people do. The
mm,
What I think encapsulates the biggest shift in mindset is how people look at taxes.
mm.
Poor people look at tax time as a chance to get a big fat refund. They use the government as their personal savings account because they don't have the financial fortitude and aptitude to actually use their money differently. They instead will go and they'll max out their contributions to Uncle Sam, and then they'll be like, I'm getting this big old fat check here. And they'll get a fat check, right? They'll go through and set up the number that they claim, the whole bit, to get the biggest, fattest refund that they can, because to them that is a windfall. That is a chance for them to go through and then spend that money getting a new, you know, ATV, going through and getting, because I grew up in the South, so this is what they spent their money on, going through and getting, some guns, going through and getting like a new truck, going through and like basically just spending that money as soon as they get it on whatever sort of recreational thing made the most sense. Whereas for people who aren't in that particular tax bracket, they look at tax time as a stressful time where they have to go through and minimize the amount of hit that they're taking in a bunch of different areas. But generally speaking, they've equipped themselves to be able to deal with that, because one of the reasons why they are where they are financially is they're able to manage their money appropriately. So, like, I've I'm 100% going to be paying some capital gains taxes this year, or heading into next year. And so I've already set aside some money knowing, you know what, Uncle Sam's going to come calling for his cut of all of my AMC profits and GameStop profits that I took earlier this year. So it's just a different mentality. It's this idea that money is this kind of like long-term entity that you have to manipulate and change in specific ways to benefit you and benefit your family. Whereas for poorer people, money is this almost near mythical thing that whenever you have it, you have to use it to like if you get a bunch of it, you have to use it to make yourself happy. And then you almost live like beyond paycheck to paycheck in between. And then you're in this almost like this cycle of misery where you just can't simply get out of it, because the moment that you do, you treat it as a huge windfall versus an actual chance to maybe right the ship a bit. It's tough though. It's tough though. I mean,
It is.
I think that the other thing too is vacations and travel are also a huge difference when you're poor and when you're not. I know, like, my partner, she saves, like, she's got, like a 5-figure savings account specifically for travel that has been built up over time from a multitude of different sources. And she goes through and she replenishes it as it's spent. And that is her, way to venture out into the world and see and do things that she otherwise wouldn't. And she came from a very, very incredibly poor background. And so she, unlike I think everybody else in her family, has a much different view of money and its value. And her and I have had some clashes in that regard, because I'm okay with spending a little more discretionary, because I come from that background of I need, to be happy. I need some things around me to be. Experiences are great, but experiences are fleeting. Things, on the other hand, will last. This PS5 down here, that's going to last a little while longer than a 1-week trip somewhere. And I get this, the whole memories thing and whatnot, but I can make a lot of memories with that thing down there. Okay. I can make a lot of good memories. So it's a matter of give and take. I go on, now that I'm with her, I've been with her for over 5 years. We go on a lot of trips. And, but she goes on some solo trips that I don't. She went to Bali without me. And during that time, I went to visit family in Tennessee. And, it's a matter of I'm perfectly okay with her maximizing her opportunities to use the money that she has the way that she wants to. And then she's okay with me using the money I have the way that I want to, as long as neither one of us end up in a situation where we're being wasteful or putting ourselves in a situation where if either one of us were to enter into work problems, that we are up a creek, without a paddle.
That's pretty good stuff.
Good stuff. Anything else you wanted to chat about before we call it an episode?
No, we've gone a little long. I had some humorous stuff to talk about. I think it would go a little too long, so maybe we'll save that story for another time.
We can do a part 2. I mean, we're going to do a music part 2, so we might as well, do a part 2, or maybe like a transition to like a related topic.
Yeah.
But on that note, that's it for us here on Gunners and Blues Midweek Madness. My name is Sean. He is Andrew. I want to thank you for listening. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Take care.
See you guys.